everybody. Here in this nondescript building in Chelsea on West 26th, today I have the pleasure of interviewing Thomas Urban. Come on in.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having us. It's so lovely to meet you.
Of course, it's my pleasure. We have a great show. It's a wonderful backdrop for what we are going to discuss in the next couple of minutes.
I am so excited to talk to you about your career and this show. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Let's get to it.
Let's go.
Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, and those in between. I am Sam Blank. Joining me here today is Thomas Urban. Thomas, you first began your career in 1989, first showing in your apartment and eventually moving to this lovely space in Chelsea. Mm-hmm. You have exhibited works by Adrian Piper, Lorraine O'Grady, Sangeet Ngugi, and of course, right now, Mike Cloud.
Correct, yeah.
You have shown at countless fairs and placed works in MoMA, DIA, the Whitney, Guggenheim, MoCA LA, the Centre Pompidou, and so much more.
Yes,
I'm so excited to be here with you today. How are you feeling?
Oh, we have a show which closes tomorrow, which was very successful. The work spoke to the audience, so I'm in a very happy mood.
Okay, I'm really happy.
Yep.
So let's go back to that, your first being in your apartment. What was it like to run your business out of your living space?
I actually at the time was a secondary market dealer. Okay. So I was dealing mainly with American work, which I sold to dealers in Europe. Okay. And so my idea or dream, I came to the United States in 1989. So I immediately jumped into secondary market dealing in 1990, like January, February. I was very involved with the Keith Haring market. But being a secondary market dealer or just deal with work which already has a name, has a market, was not something which finally excited me. So there was always this idea of opening a gallery, but I wouldn't know how to do it. So the first artist I met was Lorraine O'Grady. I saw her work in a group show, and I just thought, oh, that looks really interesting, right? So then I met her to meet, and then she interviewed me. So, how does it come that you like my work? Or what do you like about my work? So you were a very strong person. And I had the feeling, it was really instinctual, that it's interesting, it enticed me, let's do a show, right? And I didn't have a space at that time, so we just emptied the apartment, we put in lights, and that was my first official show in the United States.
And that was 1993 is when that show?
That was 1993, correct,
okay.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what was it like? Were you living in your apartment when you cleared it out?
Yes.
Okay, so what was it like to keep your apartment clean and ready for showings? Or was you only open by appointment?
I had regular hours, which were relatively limited. So it was a one bedroom on Mott Street. So everything was, of course, in the bedroom. And then, they had a writing desk and you had to work in the living room. There was also a little kitchen. So it was not unusual at this point in time because it was during the recession. So people had to find ways to show work which were outside the usual confines, the usual kind of cost structures, etc. Mm-hmm. And we sold to the Wellesley Museum, we sold to Peter Norton, Eileen and Peter Norton. It was a success. We got a review in Art in America. Yeah. And so I did the right thing with the right artist at the right point in time. It was sheer luck, but you as a dealer, you depend a lot on instinct and luck.
Okay.
So that was such a situation.
And what were openings like back then, being in your apartment?
There were, of course, all the friends of Lorraine, Sir Rodney Storey, his partner. There were basically people who knew Lorraine. Mm-hmm. There were no collectors. I mean, Peter and Eileen Norton were interested in collecting work by African-American artists at that time. So they became aware of the show. They made an appointment. They visited me. Wellesley Museum, Lorraine is a graduate from Wellesley Museum, so they were naturally interested. Mm-hmm. I didn't have these clients before, or I didn't think, okay, I make that show and I will have these clients. It just happened.
Okay, which actually brings me to my next question. What was it like getting over that first hurdle of building a client base? So you're saying you had some from clients that sort of came with Lorraine.
Yes. the client base in a gallery. Each gallery has kind of a client base. That means people you sold to, people who know you, but this is, a client base extends over a long period of time, right? So it's not that I do a show and, okay, there's my client base who's going to buy something from that show. I do have certain collectors who really support the gallery, they really like it, they look at every show, and if the work convinces them, so I can't sell work to these collectors. They are very independent, so if they like it, they buy it. If they don't like it, or if it's not for them, they don't. So I don't have like a set group of investors or collectors who continuously and whatever support the gallery. It's really on a per case basis.
Okay, and would you say that you have certain collectors that follow the artists no matter what gallery they're showing at, or it really is on a case-by-case basis?
There are of course collectors who follow certain artists, and if we happen to show the artist, we will get in touch, or we will ask the artist to bring us in touch with the collectors. And we now have a relatively wide net of contacts. So when we send out an email that goes to like 17,000 people, we have Instagram, etc. So there is, the show gets out and people see it, hopefully see it, and then we hope, of course, that there are reaction to the exhibition.
Okay.
Yeah. So there is in almost no case, in no situation is there a situation where I do a show with a new artist or an artist whom I have not exhibited before, where I know, okay, these are the collectors, I'm going to sell to this one or that one. It's always relatively, jumping into the water, as you say, and then hoping for the best.
Okay. You gotta tread the water as you go.
Yes.
Awesome. So you're starting your gallery in the recession, you're building a client base. A hurdle for galleries is deciding when to bring on help, when to bring on people. How did you navigate that decision?
Yeah. First of all, at the beginning, I supported the gallery through secondary market dealings.
Okay.
Since I was a secondary market dealer, if you switch from the secondary market to the primary market, it's a very different audience. Secondary market, it's known material, there are records, etc. You basically trade in known material. Whereas if you are in a gallery situation, it's much more socially based. It's a different kind of person who is involved with buying work from galleries, right? So what I built as a secondary market dealer, I could not translate it into the gallery activity, but being able to source works or to find works and knowing who as a dealer might be interested in that helped me to finance the gallery during the first 2-3 years.
Okay, and when you were a secondary market dealer, were you buying the work from someone and then selling them, or were you sort of like an intermediary between two people?
In most of the cases, I was an intermediary.
Okay. And would you say that the collectors of secondary market are more risk averse than those who are collecting primary?
There I have to say, during my time as a secondary market dealer, I mainly actually worked with other dealers. Okay. Since I was in the United States, it was pre-internet, so you needed a reliable connection, point of reference in the United States, because what happened usually, somebody was interested in a Warhol portfolio, right? Yeah. So, that was at a certain price level, so I actually would receive the funds. Okay. And then with those funds, I would acquire the work, I would get a commission, or I would offer it at a certain price, I would buy it at a certain price, and then I would send it to the client. So the client needed to have the confidence that if he sends or she sends me the money, that actually the work is also going to be shipped to Germany, that it is authentic, that it is in good condition. And that was in a certain way the setup, which allowed me to do business.
And were you doing your own art handling back then?
Yes. So you did little grades, etc. It was it was not on a scale that you could hire somebody to do all that. And then also, even then it cost a couple of $100 to, for example, just create a Warhol print, because they are very fragile, they can't be rolled, etc. So rather than spending this on somebody who does the work for you, you do it yourself, and it saves you a couple of hundreds of dollars.
Amazing. Okay.
It's very pragmatic at that level.
Yeah. And how many years in was it before you really started to develop a team?
I've always had help from the very beginning. It was more with interns, and then at a certain point, somebody worked for you like $400 a day, right? And so at the beginning, what people also don't understand, it was very difficult actually to employ people because of all the regulations. Now you can go to like SquareUp, for example, right? You hire somebody, they do all the paperwork. Whereas at that time, you had to write to the various agencies, you had to monthly send reports, etc. So if you have one or two people working for you, it's a tremendous administrative effort to just fulfill the requirements for having them as employees. So what I did for a very long time is I had people who were basically freelancers. So they had to take care of their own like social security payments, etc. That worked for a couple of years, and then I always had one person, and then we had sometimes interns added to that, and then we had two people. So it's still a relatively small enterprise. So now it's all like employee, but it's so much easier now with all the help from websites, and service companies, etc.
Awesome. So I spoke to you before we started the interview about how I was watching some public access television from the 90s, and I saw your old space as she came into the building. Can you talk about that move from Broome Street up to Chelsea?
Yes, I was on Broome Street for 4 years, and then it became clear that there's very little traffic in Soho. So many galleries had already moved to Chelsea. I was actually relatively late in my move to Chelsea, which I did in 2000. And at that time, it was just necessary because Soho was dead in terms of traffic. At that time, you still relied a lot on foot traffic because, internet, websites were not yet as evolved, so you depended on people literally visiting the gallery space.
Wow. I am wondering, did you come directly to this space, or?
No. For 5 years, I was part of a triumvirate of galleries. So there was Andrew Krebs, there was Sarah Meltzer, who no longer has the gallery, there was myself. We rented the ground floor space of a parking building, and we built it out, us three together. Each of us had his or her allotted space.
Okay. So you were like in a parking garage, basically?
Yes, but we were on the ground floor.
Okay.
Right? And above us, their cars were parked there.
Okay. So you were sort of in the retail space of this parking garage?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Now, you talked a lot about how you had your gallery before the internet. Can you talk about that emergence of the internet and social media and how it shifted your strategy?
Yes, of course, at the beginning it was technically still relatively, you dialed up, etc. But very early on already, because I thought it's great, it saves a lot of money, etc. I developed the mailing list. So very early on, I would say gallery opened 96. I would say around 98 already, we switched a lot to like email send outs. I was very aware of since I was in a very small space, I was very, very aware that website is really important. So we had relatively early on a website. So I was very aware of that. Whereas I have to say, I never was very active, or the gallery was never active on Twitter, was never very active on Facebook. We have a page on Instagram, which we are really taking care of. But I personally am not very involved with social media. So in a certain way, we are still classically getting in touch with our collectors or corresponding through email. That's for us still the main medium.
So email sort of was the biggest thing to revolutionize your business?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay. And that
JPEGs. Sorry.
That original website, were you the one maintaining it, or were you having a website designer back then?
We had a website designer.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, you did not have yet these sites which host other websites, or where you can just subscribe to have your own. So where the technical apparatus is available for you to just fill in the information, we had to literally develop a website.
And so you were beholden to someone whenever you wanted to make changes or have a show?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. And you would say, so before you had the email list, was it physically mailing?
Yes.
Okay.
You would send out cards, you would send out letters, press releases, etc.
Directly to people?
Yes.
Okay.
You would also send out slides. So you would have slides, you would send out slides. If it's a more expensive art, so you would send out an hectagram.
Okay.
So that's very physical.
So it's sort of the same as when artists were sending slides to galleries. It really was everyone was relying on.
Yes, that was the means of communication, of visual communication.
Okay. I want to shift to sort of an overall broad question.
Yeah.
What do you feel is the gallerist's role in the art world?
Well, I think we are still, if I may speak for my profession, we are still the people who literally find artists. You know, whose job it is to be out there, to see what will be of value to be actually shown in a wider context. And I don't speak about material or monetary value, I speak about intellectual value and idealistic value. So, and we are still in a certain way, the connection, the initial connection of the artist to the art world. I'm very aware that there are other mechanisms where artists have very successful websites on their own, they have Instagram accounts, and they have an audience through that. It's often a certain type of artist who uses these mediums to gain access to an audience. I don't want to disparage here any of these processes, but in order to be successful, you also need to have material which speaks to a broader audience, which is more immediate, which works very well visually also through the digital mediums. So I think, for example, Kaws, K-A-W-S, he's not a bad artist, but is he an artist who is really contributing to what's possible in art? He's, please don't understand me correctly. Please do understand me correctly. I'm not against that, but it's a certain segment of art making I'm not necessarily engaged with.
Yeah, I mean, in my classes, we just refer to it, there's artists and there's social media artists.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with social media artists.
Correct, yeah.
But it is definitely a different type of art than what is being shown in galleries today.
That is correct. When I even would push it a little bit further and would say, it would be so interesting if there is an artist who uses the social media space, but to critical ends. I would be very interested in that, and I'm sure there are artists out there. So, it's within the art world, and we've seen that historically again and again, we can't kind of disparage any like outsider art by women. These were all kind of areas of creativity which were not as valued at certain points in time.
Yeah.
So I also would not automatically disvalue or avow that there something interesting can happen there. For me, the question is only how interesting is it? Is it really, does it open up possibilities? Does it play with the medium to an extent so that it really mines and questions the possibility of that medium? So I would not approach it, say, from a category, or that's internet art, right? Or that's like popular art or social media art. I would say, okay, it's art in itself, it's interesting, but what do they do with these possibilities, with that space? So it's a different kind of questioning.
Yeah, I want to go back to something you said about how the gallerists are the ones finding artists.
Very often, yeah.
Yeah, now you are sort of known for finding artists who are out of the Western world, out of America specifically. Can you talk about where your interest in finding these Eastern artists comes from? Artists from Pakistan, from India, where that comes from, and what your process looks like finding them now?
I think that if you work with artists at the beginning of careers, or if you introduce artists into different contexts, it's always like a personal, there are personal reasons why you do that. So there are certain geographic areas I'm very interested in out of personal interest, for example, South Asia, India, and then historically like India, Pakistan, and that my way was almost, how my interest evolved was almost historically, because it was India and then was Pakistan and then Iran, whereas of course there was, in terms of culture, it was the movement from Iran to Pakistan to India, so I made it the other way around. So that's very interesting to me. Yeah, particularly like the South Asian space is very interesting. Then the African American space, very interesting for me, without wanting to only occupy that space. I started also working with an African artist in the early 2000s, but it was very difficult. There was no market for the work. So that I felt this is not a path I can pursue because there's no resonance, there's no market, it's impossible. And so then I entered like in 2003, 2000 for the South Asian market. Curiosity, my husband is Indian, now American, so there are personal relationships also. And I, as a student, traveled also in India in the late 70s. So there are these personal interests. And something else I think is very important to say. So if you show work from another culture, you have to have an access to that culture. Because if you come with your mindset of like Western mindset or New Yorker mindset, you go somewhere else, you will only look at it from your perspective. You don't know what it means to that specific cultural context. And you know, it's just like you impose, so to speak, your taste, your idea of what art should be upon another culture. And there, of course, you find things which correspond to your ideas, right? But this is not what you are supposed to do if you show work from other cultures. You also need to bring that culture here. So you need to, there has to be a translation. So things which exist there, you bring them here, you explain them in the context here, they have to be explainable in that context here. So it's about an expansion. It's not about like picking things which are similar to what you do. It's really like extending yourself emotionally, intellectually into another culture, start to understand it, start to even look with your own eyes and then see where are these surfaces where both cultures, histories can intersect, or where do they touch. And this is usually the work I try to show.
Okay. And has social media helped you find these artists and find these connections, or has it sort of been the same, you've looked the same way since before? I'm not a big follower, for example. I look at very, very little at Instagram because it might be generation. I feel overwhelmed. So the problem I see is with social media is you can make look anything interesting. Yeah. The angle, the color, how you contextualize it. But then if you are confronted with the actual object, then you can, given that I have a lot of experience, I can much quicker judge whether it's of interest yet or no. Yeah. So I go to social media, particularly Instagram, relatively carefully and not very often, because there are so many things which really look interesting. Then you feel, oh, I should research this, I should research that. You don't have the time. And so it's just this moment where you feel overwhelmed. So I still rely more on going to shows. People tell me all the time about other artists. I'm looking at emails which are coming to me. We get proposals, etc. I'm just being porous, being open, seeing, you know, where is something which piques your interest. Yeah. That's more, it's really instinctual. Where do you feel energy? Where does something surprise you? Yeah, and when you were traveling, you just got back from India. Are you always keeping your eye out, or are there some times where you travel and it's just for vacation?
Past 2 weeks, vacation.
Okay.
Yes, but I go back to India and I will attend the Mumbai Gallery weekend. Okay. So there it will be really going through everything, who's meeting people that are really sorting through the scene to see is there something I might want to take to New York.
And this is sort of a hyper-technical question. Is it difficult paying the artists who, when they live in other countries, like, do you have to do a bunch of complex things, or?
No, I mean, it's only difficult with Iranian artists, but, you know, they often have accounts in other countries, or they have relatives, so with India, it's not that much of a problem. Iran was the biggest problem in that case.
Awesome. Alrighty, that's a great place to leave, so let's take a quick break. Welcome back, everybody. I'm here with Thomas Urban. I want to move into what influenced your decision to keep your gallery like relatively small, a certain size, not constantly scaling up?
Well, it has to do with my core interest. So it was never my interest to have a big gallery, to have an enterprise. So the idea is more to showcase a certain kind of art, you know, which corresponds, of course, with my responsibility. And that requires risk-taking. You know, we have a show coming up, for example. I don't know whether we will sell anything from that show, but do I think it's a really good show, interesting artist, worthwhile artist? Yes. So that's one. So it's what I show. And then also I have a lot of patience with artists. So if I really think this is interesting, it's worthwhile, and it's not blind. So of course I pay attention to what people say, how do people react to the work. So I'm not saying that, oh, this is the best, you have to believe me. I put forth, and then I also check what do other people say. Do I see it correctly? I constantly check the work of the artist I represent with what I see out there. How relevant is it? Is there somebody who does something better, right? And then why should I, it's not as rude as that, but why should I show this artist if another artist of the same generation or similar context does it so much better, right? So that's why, it also took a relatively long time to hone my program. I think we are now at a level where we have really good artists, because you don't find them so often. And I took artists on always relatively either early in their career or artists who were overlooked. Even when we showed Adrian Piper, for example, the work was not selling. She was a critically highly relevant artist. She was on the cover of Art in America, for example. She had an audience, but it was art which you wouldn't think you could sell or somebody would buy. So it was very clear. So I don't want to deviate too much, but so with each artist, you in a certain way, as a dealer, you have a task, right? So you, in a certain way, have to pinpoint, you have to find out what needs to be done in order to for this artist's career to progress, right? And so Adrian Piper, for example, she was seen as a political artist, as an activist. She was not considered an artist, right? So you had to counter that. So I published this portfolio, Food for the Spirit. She printed one or two of those negatives, like in 1971-72, on RC paper, right? It looked lamentable, right? So I really produced these images. Now it's an absolutely major body of work. So I knew you have to, in a certain way, bring Adrian more into the realm of aesthetics, of putting for the argument that she's a very innovative artist, not only a political activist. So you had to, in a certain way, shift the perception of the artist. So which each artist have a very particular task in order to make it work.
Yeah. And when you're thinking, I have to shift this artist's work, are you in their studios talking to them about it, sort of suggesting things to them, or is this a more abstract push that you're going for?
So I'm not shifting the artist's work.
Okay.
I'm shifting the perception of the artist's work, right? And so I'm usually, I also make the difference, there are cat dealers, or dealers whose artists are like cats. You can't tell them anything. They go their own way. They come, they like it, they don't. And there are dealers who are really like, tell the artist, oh, I need 10 paintings like this. This sells well. I need more of that. So in a certain way, they are the maestro of the artist's career, right? So it's not how I'm working. I work with very independently minded artists, and I never tell them exactly what to do, but I'm a sounding board.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's also very interesting. I always have a sense of an artist's potential. I see the potential, and then in a certain way, me being present as a dealer, I'm always like a reminder of the potential. It makes some artists really uncomfortable, and so that brings also, in a certain way, a tension in the relationships I have with my artists, right? Because I don't say, oh, whatever you do is great. In a certain way, even to my presence, and I don't mean this in an obtrusive or like domineering way, just I feel what the potential is of somebody and whether they live up to what they are actually capable of doing. It's a very different dynamic than how you would usually describe, the relationship between a dealer and an artist.
Mm-hmm. And are you ever the worry of profitability or keeping the gallery open, is that ever influencing how you speak to your artists, or do you try and really separate those two things?
I try to always keep a calm, right? So where there are times when, it's iffy, of course, it will happen many times, but I never shifted that burden upon the artist. Mm-hmm. right? So then I had to say, what can I do to solve that situation?
And those rocky times, have those drastically affected your program, or do you really try and stay steadfast in the aesthetic you believe in?
I always try to stay steadfast. The way it has actually impacted the program is, if you have more of a financial cushion, you can be even more adventurous. You can do this travel. Or somebody said to me, why don't you come, a couple of years ago, why don't you come to Rio, right? And if I would have gone, there would have been a very important group of artists who are now very famous, but I didn't have the means, or I didn't dare to do it, right? So it impacted definitely the programming, not in my, aspiration of the quality level I want to have in the gallery. It was more in the ability, actually, to really go out there and to spread my looking at art so widely that I can really find art which all of it lives up to my expectations. So of course, sometimes you have to compromise a little bit, because you also have to have a show each time. You can't say I close the gallery for half a year. So that, I would say that hampered me to a certain degree.
Okay. And we're just discussing your role in an artist's life. I'm wondering, what do you feel is the impact you have on a collector's life?
I would not think that I have an impact on a collector's life. Okay. So life is a pretty big term and expectations. Collectors who usually buy from the gallery, it's a pursuit. It's an intellectual pursuit. It's like, expanding their knowing of things into a different area. It has to do with pleasure. So I think what we add as galleries generally is like a different window to people's life. Like when you go to the opera, you get swayed away for evening, you get carried away. So these objects do that also on a daily level in a collector's house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, so you don't feel that it's like an overall to their life, but do you feel that you have an impact on the aesthetic of their life at all? Or is it really you're giving them this artwork and then it's...
And of course, if you have relationship with collectors, they start to understand your viewpoint, or why you show this artist, or why. And so there's a discussion going on, and it basically goes back and forth. It's not one way. So it's, we are all, the entire art world or art business is basically in a process of learning. We all learn there are new artists. Why is that new? Is it interesting? How does it relate to the past? Or is that only a smoke screen? In the art world generally, there's this constant struggle for consensus. Mm-hmm. Basically, why is Warhol, for example, such an important artist? Because there's a consensus. But this consensus was not there from the very beginning. So his work has to be, so to speak, leveraged and perceived and approved to many, many levels of filtration to reach that level. And we are all part of that layer through which work has to basically move to become this very, very important, very blue chip to gain that status.
And where do you feel you lie in that level to get to the blue chip status?
Well, I try to show work which is it sounds really generic, of high quality. Now, of course, you can say, what is high quality? How you do define it, right? And there I come into the equation where, I have certain ideas what high quality is, or the standards I set for myself. And if these standards are then also applicable from other people's perspective, then of course I have an artist who is able to maybe go on a large, with a big upswing movement through that system of approval and recognition.
And as a gallerist, you have some artists that you show their work occasionally, and some that you represent.
That's correct, yeah.
Can you define like the difference in just showing and representing for our audience?
I mean, if I show artists generally, then they are part of the gallery gestalt. But of course, there are artists, as for example, Nusha Tavakolian. She's an Iranian photographer. She had 2 solo shows with us. We showed her at Art Bars in Hong Kong. I don't remember the year, so I have access to the work. So she's part, so to speak, of the entourage. But she's a Magnum member. She has so many, not necessarily gallery shows, but she's busy. So she has enough of her own momentum so that I don't contribute largely to her career. Or there's, for example, Stefan Sagmeister, who that's why I showed once. So we are not making that career. That career is something which is on its own trajectory. So we then participate from time to time in that career. Whereas for other artists, we are really the structure which helps to generate the career.
Okay, so when you are choosing to represent someone, it's because you see that you can provide something to their career that they do not already have.
That is correct, but we don't represent, let's say, Stefan Sagmeister, but Gagosian wants to, or the curator there wants to put a piece in a show there up, so they contact us. So we are also a point of reference for the outside world, but we are not, let's say, at large the generator of that career. Whereas for other artists, it's really us showing the artist, taking to the art, building the career.
And is there a mode of pursuit that you go after when you do want to represent an artist and have them on that artist page on your website?
Yes, so of course there is like this initial dance, right? So, you can't be too overpowering, and it's this, like in a relationship, there's a little bit back and forth, and you are careful, and you gauge, etc. And then you try to kind of consolidate that, right? So it's always like, it's the social approach first, and then of course, you do a show, then you see how it works for the artist, for yourself. You get to know the artist better because it's a real life, it's a real work situation, and then hopefully you can take it from there and further. So it develops over time. Mm-hmm. It's a relationship.
It's a relationship. And would you say that when you first show an artist, can you tell quite immediately whether or not you want to go after representing them? Or is there certain things you look for in the first time you show an artist to decide?
There are certain artists where I feel very strongly about, and I say, okay, I really would like to work with this artist, even if he didn't do a solo show yet. I mean, there's one case which is coming up like that. With other artists, you kind of, more slowly wade into the water. This is always about, how convinced or how strongly do you feel about an artist's work.
Lovely. I want to talk about when you're preparing a show.
Yeah.
For this show specifically and all your shows, are there works that are made for the shows that don't always end up in the show?
We ideally always have a slight surplus of work. This particular show, for example, there was one surplus, but it was constituted or configured slightly different, which we then decided to not take into the show. But it's, preparing a show, seeing the objects, but then experiencing the object in the space itself, they always occupy the space differently than you expected. So there's such an intrinsic relationship between the object in the space that only once you have the object in the space, you really can make the decisions. So it's always good to have a little bit of a surplus.
And those works that don't make it into the show, what is your approach to? Do you archive them? Are they sent to storage? Do you keep them around for collectors to view if there's, the show sells out and you want one more work?
Of course, yeah. That's a body of work which is being transported to the gallery. Then we usually keep it even beyond the show. If you represent the artist, it goes in storage, becomes available for the future.
Okay, and you sort of just keep a record of that?
Yes, of course, there are databases, everything is in the database, the prices, etc., who inquired for what, so that's all. Through these databases, all this information is very easily accessible and you can organize it very easy.
And you often show works that are very concept-driven and have, as you said, you love experimentation with materials.
Yeah.
Does the experimentation worry you when it comes to keeping those works safe in storage for as long as you need them to be?
I mean, you can pack things really well. Yeah, I mean, I was very concerned, for example, about Sengan Ngudi's nylon mesh piece. It's got this really pantyhose nylon mesh material in sand. But then, we also, a couple of years ago, we got one piece which was actually created in 1976, and we saw how it survived. So you always have to take care of art. You have to pack it properly, the boxes, etc. So I'm not too, except if it's material which really decays, but otherwise, you just have to take care of it, pack it properly, and that takes, care of that issue.
And have you ever received a show, opened the crate, got it out from the art handlers, and sort of had a moment of like, oh, this is not what I expected. I don't know what to do with this show?
It happened that you saw an artist and the work in a certain context, and you got really excited because you also experienced it in that context, you delved into that context, you understood it in that context. And then you brought it here, and then you said, actually it doesn't work as well here as I thought, right? But then, of course, you have the show here. You can't cancel it. So you have to go through that. So that happened, yes. Because sometimes, again, what I already explained about the object coming to the gallery, each gallery offers a very specific context. It's almost like a bath. You bring a work, you bring it into that environment, it's an energy, and then it holds up, or it contradicts, or it's not what you usually do, and then you realize it. But then it's, of course, too late, because the show is already programmed, right? Then you have to go through it, yeah.
And so you're just sort of sitting in a gallery for like a month and just kind of biting your nails and hoping something better happens?
You can't do that either, right? I mean, we always have enough to do, even if a show is not very active. There's always many things we have to do. But then if there's a show I'm really not that convinced about, I would not necessarily go out and try to sell it to my collectors, because if I can't stand behind it, then the collector, I had once the experience, a collector who has been buying many things for us over many, many years, and then he asked me, oh, how about this one? What happened with that artist? And then you get like a laundry list, and then it becomes very, very painful.
Yeah.
So I try to avoid that problem, right?
Yeah.
So then I go through the show. If somebody wants to buy something, that's fine, but I'm not as actively promoting it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, lovely. I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
Were there any goals that you never thought you'd accomplish but did, and are there any goals you're still looking for?
Okay, so when I opened the gallery, right, I could never imagine that, for example, we would be at the Art Basel fair, right? It had to do with the fact that I didn't work in a gallery before, so that was really very far. And, it was such intimate thing to do, that gallery, the artists I showed, etc. So I never thought it would go so far that I could, be part of that really kind of global scene. Was the ambition there for the work? Yes. Or was I convinced that, like Agent Piper, when he did the show, that it belongs there? But actually, to get there, it was kind of, for me, unfathomable. And it took, for me, a relatively long time to get there, right? Which then also had to do with the fact that I didn't work in a gallery before. Did I have a gallery background, or was I in the art business except for secondary market dealing before? No. So I needed a lot of time to basically learn everything on the run. So it was for me a very long way to go through, which I could have abbreviated and, being prepared to partaking in the profession before. Mm-hmm.
And is there anything you really want? Any fairs you've yet to do or anything?
Well, we applied for Art Basel next year with Mike. We participated last year with Senga, which everybody liked, was a big success. We applied with Ola Dele Bamboye this year. They didn't want it. And next year, we are still hopeful for Mike Cloud, because, looking at all these layers in the art, that's really, that's the really interesting layer to crack. Mm-hmm. And if I can do that, I will be very happy. If I can't, then what can I do?
Mm-hmm. So you're not going to do Basel this year, or are you?
No, we do Art Basel Miami Beach,
Okay.
yeah. But of course, the ground jewel of that group of fairs, of course, Basel.
Yeah.
So we try our best. My pleasure. It was a really nice atmosphere here. You know, I felt very comfortable, and that allowed for that flow of like information and sharing.
I was like, as you would answer, I was crossing off questions because you were just covering everything I was going to ask you as we were going. It was absolutely lovely. All right, Anthony, do you have anything?
Nothing that comes to mind, but maybe just like what surprised you?
Surprised me.
In terms of what was the stuff? Like, what was surprising to you? Because you've studied it extensively, like the background.
Yeah. I have to say the ties story about how you were manufacturing ties, that was amazing.
That's a surprise, yeah.
I was like, whoa. And I was surprised that you did not have a gallery background. And I was wondering, did you move to America with the idea of I'm going to become a secondary market dealer, or you're like, I just want to move to America?
So of course I've always been interested in art, and when I lived in Paris, my partner was a painter, so I stretched the canvases, mixed the paint, and she was a very intuitive painter, and so I always had to stop thinking, to not interfere, so that my thinking doesn't intersect with her thinking, because she was working so intuitively. And I think there I learned something which I'm now applying to the artists. You don't interfere. You do a studio visit, for example, with Janis Nowinski, right? And she says, okay, these paintings are coming, and I don't know whether this one is ready. What do you think? And I say, you know what? I won't fixate you in saying, oh, this is ready or this is not ready. I give you the space to revise a painting. I'm not keeping you to what I see right now. I think that's what I learned in that process, and I think it's really important to give artists the freedom. And what was the other question? Sorry.
Did you, when you came to America, were you just like, I want to come to America, or was there someone in Germany that was like, I need a trusted source in America. Do you want to go be it for me?
It was a little more complicated than that. So when I moved to America, I was with my partner at that time, and it was she at that time, and she was the driving force. I would have stayed in Paris, right? But she wanted to have a career as a painter in New York, right? And so we came here. We had like $30,000. We rented a place on Broome Street, etc. And then within like half a year, all was gone, right? And so, of course, we came back from Germany at that time after Christmas, and then, it's only that amount in the account. So what do we do, right? And by sheer circumstances, I met a gallery in Amsterdam, and they asked me, could you provide us work by Keith Haring from the American market, right? I was not very aware of Keith Haring at that point in time. So we came back to New York, and then I started secondary market dealing, and I tapped right away into the hot Keith Haring market at that time, right? And so just slithering into it, which, through New York Times ad, again, there was no internet accessible, and I put ads in magazines, as in German newspapers, etc. And that was like how I literally fell into the art market. I wanted it, right? But I wouldn't know how to do it because my visa at that time wouldn't allow for me to work in a gallery. So I had to kind of find a way to insert myself, but I wouldn't know how to do it. So through these circumstances, which were really like fortuitous, I gained access.
Lovely. Awesome. Well, I'm going to leave that there. Thank you all for joining us this week. Thank you, Thomas, for having us.
My pleasure.
It was a lovely, amazing interview. I'm just wondering, where can the people find you? What is your website, your Instagram?
It is thomaserben.com. We are here at 526 West 26th Street in Chelsea. We are open Tuesday to Saturday, 11 to 6. It's a public gallery. We are open to the audience here. Instagram is Thomas Erben Gallery. Put in my name, Thomas Erben, E-R-B-E-N. Thomas with an H. You'll find us very easily.
Alrighty, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and I will see you next time.
Yeah, thank you for the interview.
Thank you.
So also, there's a more natural interaction with the audience. Yeah, so they come up to us, or we are one of the really relatively few galleries where we actually talk with people. So Anthony is very good at that. Walking up, see do they want to talk or not. So the idea for me is always, as a gallery, it's not about selling things; it's about mediating it.